is because there's no frame of reference for what he is, right? Um, how can I talk about him when he's indescribable, right? But what we do know is what we see, and what we do know is what we know in our experience. And so if we talk about what we know and then say what he is not, it's helpless to make sense. To give you an example, think about the hymn written by Walter Smith, and I was reading about this in an article I was reading by Donald T. Smith. Think about that song, immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. In that just first line of that famous hymn that we've sung many times, the author says four things about God by saying four things in a negative way. He says he is immortal, he is invisible, he is only wise, in light inaccessible. So by saying that he is not mortal, by saying that he is not visible, and by saying that he is not accessible, you're learning about him, even though what his nature is kind of foreign to us and impossible to understand. We know that he's not like you and I, meaning he doesn't have mortality. We know that he is not visible. We don't know what he appears to be like. I don't know what he looks like. But I can tell you he's not visible, and he's inaccessible. And in that same way, that kind of gets to the point of what I'm talking about here today and the mission of the church. If God indeed is invisible, and he is, the important thing for the lost of this world is what is visible. And what is visible is you and me. We are visible. The church is visible. And because God is invisible, and he is above us, and he is in heaven, and we are on earth, the testimony of who God is and what he wants to accomplish is left to that which is visible, which is his church. And that has a lot to do with the purpose of this book of Acts and the purpose of the Holy Spirit. In the Bible, the Spirit, who is the central focus of the book of Acts, is likened to the wind. The Bible uses something to describe the Holy Spirit. It uses the idea of wind, and that's appropriate. Because the wind is everywhere, but everywhere unseen, correct? You can't see the wind. But if you want to see the wind, you have to see the effects of it. If you look at a lake, and you see the waves on the lake, if you even see whitecaps on the lake, you don't see the wind, but you see the effect of the wind on the lake as the waves lap against the shore, don't you? You don't see the wind at a campfire, but you do see the smoke swirling up. And you see the smoke wafting to and fro, and you see the wind in the smoke. If you were to go outside today, you can't see the wind that kicks up, but you can see the rustling of the leaves on the tree, right? And so while you can't see the wind is made manifest by things which are visible, like leaves and water and smoke. Does that make sense? Well, in the same way, the Spirit is invisible. You can't see the Spirit. But the Spirit, it does become visible when he indwells you and I, and we, as followers of God, exemplify a Spirit-filled life. For instance, when you see somebody giving cheerfully, which is not a human characteristic, to give money away and to give it away cheerfully is not necessarily something we're used to. But when the Spirit indwells you and you're able to do that, you can see the Spirit in a cheerful giver. Or perhaps when somebody is in the midst of a great trial or in the midst of a great storm, if you want to put it that way, and they have remarkable peace. That peace, that calm, that sense of composure, that pacific nature that they have, that's the result of the Spirit in their lives. When you see, we don't see it much today, but you can hear accounts of people who are being martyred. When that martyr, that person who's being burned to death or being killed, when they have a smile on their face, that smile in the midst of great persecution, even persecution to the point of death, is that not like a wave on a lake where you can see the effect of the Spirit in his countenance? I believe you can. But just as the wind is unseen on a frozen lake, or on a cold, unlit fire, or on a tree without leaves, so is the Spirit unseen in a cold, dead, lifeless church. Okay? And if the church of God, if our church is spiritless, then the Spirit goes unseen in the world, because the Spirit is like the wind. And indeed, God is invisible. And so if we do not allow ourselves to be indwelled and to be about the Holy Spirit in our lives and about following the Lord and having Him indwell us, then the world is not going to see God because we are unable to show Him. Okay? And that's the point of this book. Acts is a book about the Holy Spirit. If you read the book of Acts, the book of Acts has almost entirely to do with the promise of the Holy Spirit, the need for the Holy Spirit, the actual coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and then the reign of the Spirit in His church. The central figure and character in the book of Acts is not Paul, really, as much as it is the Holy Spirit, because this is the age, if you want to put it that way, of the Spirit. And these last two verses in the book of Acts really do encapsulate the nature of the Spirit-filled church as it was intended to be. The book concludes with Paul making his trip to Rome, which was the whole idea and intent of his life. He wanted to take this new gospel, this new word, he wanted to take the news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ to the center of the known world, to the hub of the world, which was Rome, the seat of the greatest empire perhaps the world has ever seen. And so for Paul, that was his greatest joy and desire, was to take the gospel to the very height during his time. He was successful. But again, the story is not about the charisma and the power and the personality of Paul. Rather, the book is about the charisma, the power, the personality of the Holy Spirit as it works throughout His people. And so just from this last two verses, I want to show you just some things. They're just instructions or things I think that we are called to be just from these simple verses. And the first one that I see in here, the first maxim, if you want to put it that way, for the life of a believer, is that we have to divest of things and invest in people. Look at the first part of verse 30. Talking about Paul, it says, "And he stayed 2 full years in his own rented quarters." Just in that little bit of a verse, you learn a lot about Paul and about what it means to be a believer. For one thing, he lived there for 2 years in a foreign place that was not his home, and he stayed there in rented quarters that he rented himself. And here you're having, again, exemplified